Hello, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. And this episode is about teaching children to code. This is my daddy's podcast, and I hope you enjoy this show.
My name is Mason, and I'm 4, and I want to learn to kinetics.
A big thank you to Jack and Mason for just doing the intro. As Jack rightly said, this episode will be all about teaching kids to code. And I think we're going to start off with a little giveaway. So one of the things we're going to be talking about very soon is the microbit. So I'm going to ship out a microbit to the first person that can tweet out the technology that my 4-year-old son Mason just mentioned that he wants to learn, if you can tell what he says. So mention me at Dracan, D-R-A-C-A-N, mention the podcast, and mention the technology that Mason wants to learn, and I'll get one of those shipped out. So I'm super excited today to be joined by Pete Gallagher, Microsoft MVP, Pluralsight author, user group organizer, speaker, blogger. In fact, this list is identical to the intro I did for Steve Gordon in the last episode. It's kind of like you're living parallel lives. But we're going to talk about something completely different today. So a massive welcome to the show, Pete.
Thanks for having me. Steve is a busy guy as well. Absolutely. And cracking. Fellow MVP, of course. So, he definitely earns that time.
So before we start, could you give us a quick intro into your background and what it is you do?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to concentrate on the IoT space mainly, which is, I guess, what people tend to know me for mostly. But I've been programming for decades now. I started out at a company that made change machines and cash handling electronics, doing IoT stuff way back in the day, like 1999, straight from university, and I've been doing it ever since. That company folded, and I started up on my own immediately after that. That was, I don't know, 10 years ago now or something. So I've been on doing my own stuff for 10 years, which it's been fantastic for the most part. So I count myself as quite lucky in that respect. But obviously when I started up for myself, I kind of just did whatever work was out there. I didn't really be very choosy about what I was doing. So I did anything from, little one-man band websites to working with companies that were doing events for Virgin and BT and stuff like that. So anything that anybody had paid me to do, even dancing in the rain, I would have been happy doing that. But more and more recently, I've been doing a lot more IoT stuff. I was always doing IoT stuff, but if you're working for yourself, you don't often get to choose so much what you get to do. So I'm quite glad I'm doing quite a lot of IoT. And then obviously all of the stuff you mentioned there, running user groups. I co-organised .NET Knots with Jess White. Jess is fantastic as well. And Knots IoT, and although it's not running at the moment, Knots Dev Workshop with Gosha Borcheska. We run that too. And I'm a board member of a high-tech meetup group called Lati, based in Loughborough as well. And I'm on a show called Azure-ish, which is a Twitch show every fortnight. And along with Liam Gulliver, Jonathan Ralph, Louise Paling and Misha Bell, we're also on the Agile Engineering podcast. So it's a fair bit that I get involved with, and the whole family and all that sort of stuff as well.
Well, I didn't realise you did a podcast until we were chatting on Twitter the other day. And then you mentioned it, and it was like, oh, wow. So I've got another podcast to add to my feed, my Pocketcast feed.
Yeah, I can imagine. Mine's ever growing, and obviously this one got added. I mean, what's this? Is this the third or the fourth one you've recorded? Or?
Well, the very first one was just like a 6-minute introduction. So that not really a full episode. And then we had Derek Comartin, then Steve Gordon. So this is the next one after that. So still very early days, learning lots and lots.
As always. It's good though, it's fantastic.
Yeah, how are you finding because if you're freelance with all the lockdown and COVID and working from home?
Well, I mean, I've been working at home for the last 10 years anyway, so funnily enough, I'm sitting currently in my office, which is a converted garage essentially. I mean, nobody puts cars in garages, do they? So it was just full of. I used to be in a band, and it was full of band equipment and toolboxes, and I think it had a fridge full of beer in it at one point, which was probably the best thing it ever had in it. I got to the point where I was working in one of the bedrooms upstairs with like desks made up, and we were expecting our first daughter, and so I've got two daughters now, and so I kind of knew that the writing was on the wall for doing that, and I wasn't going to be able to get any peace and quiet. So my uncle was a builder; he's retired now, and he and I essentially converted this. It was a great thing to do. I couldn't walk for about a week afterwards, but it was, and I learned also. I mean, I did a lot of the work myself. I mean, obviously, I couldn't do the actual building part, which is why I got my uncle involved. But I was mixing cement and pouring cement and knocking bricks out of walls and putting plasterboard up and running cables and all of that sort of stuff I got involved with, and it was a big project, but really well worth it, because having your own space, certainly now, COVID really hasn't affected me other than when, like currently, the kids are off because their school bubbles have closed. That's the biggest disadvantage, and certainly when all the schools were closed, people were sort of not complaining, people were having to try and get over the isolation, because most people were at work in an office with other people, and now perhaps if they didn't have children at home, or they didn't have another half or whatever to come home to, if you were in the house on your own, then isolation was a big problem essentially. But for me, perversely, it's lack of isolation that was the problem with having the amount of noise that you get all day rather than just part of the day was quite difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky that at the moment in this area we've not been affected with bubbles being burst or anything. Like, so the kids are currently still at school. Like during the actual lockdown where schools were closed, then there was a few interruptions. It wasn't too bad though, because my wife only works part-time, so she basically took the brunt of most of the childcare, and because I'm a contractor, so if I don't work, we don't get paid.
Yeah,
so
it's
I
the exact same thing for me. Yeah.
So I got largely left alone, which I was very grateful for. But yeah, it's just I've got a dedicated room, so I'm very lucky. I kind of feel sorry for people that have to work from home, have kids at home, don't have a dedicated office, almost on a laptop on the sofa. So it must be very, very difficult.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, we're lucky that I think we're lucky in this industry anyway that we've got that facility to be able to work from home, and I'd say that most of us, at least in this, don't have to have a giant amount of kit to make that happen either. So, I mean, obviously, if you're a machinist or something, then you've just got to go. But yeah, you're right. If you've not got a dedicated space and you're sat perhaps on the dining room table or in the kitchen or even in the lounge or something, and now what used to be your safe home relaxation space has now turned into your office, and it psychologically must be quite difficult, I can imagine.
I think we're quite lucky because our passion and hobby is our job.
Yes.
But if that's not the case, then you really have got that. Your living space has turned into work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, this is probably the reason why I have no time and I do so much, is that exactly what you've just said, is that this is fun for me, for the most part. And I mean, again, I count myself as quite lucky and privileged in that respect, that I do enjoy what I do, and it's fun. And I guess being a freelancer helps with that, because no 2 days are ever the same for what I'm doing. It's nearly always a multi-client day, never mind several clients in a week. So it really does keep it mixed up. It's a good position to be in, and yeah, paying the mortgage with something you love to do is not something that everybody has the privilege to be able to do. So I do count myself lucky in that respect.
Yeah, I'm kind of like being a contractor, so it's kind of it's in between both worlds. I work for 2 companies at the moment, 2 clients, and one I do 4 days a week, but it's 4 solid days a week, and then the Friday's more freelance based for another client. So it's not quite as flexible each day, but it's still like it's more flexible than being employed. So it's quite nice. So we should probably jump onto the actual topic at hand.
No, we could just go on like this for ages, can't we?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, knowing how these podcasts tend to go, we'll probably go on lots of different tangents anyway, so we'll just see how it goes. But so I've got a 4 and 6-year-old, and I've been playing around a bit with Scratch with my eldest Jack. and I decided this would be a really nice topic for a podcast episode. So I reached out on Twitter asking what experience different people had, and I got an awful lot of replies from someone called Pete Gallagher, with lots and lots of different hardware, software, gadgets and things. So I immediately went and ordered a microbit, and I played around with it. It's got a tool called MakeCode, which is very similar to Scratch, and you can like drag and drop blocks around. So I've been doing that with Jack. And the first thing we developed was a dice where you can, because it's got an accelerometer on it, so a dice that you can shake and it shows a number on it. And we play Monopoly quite a bit, so we decided to use this dice, but cheat a little bit. So it's got two buttons on it, A and B. We thought, if we press the A button, it can increment a variable, a number. And then press the B button, it would set that on the LEDs. So everyone else in the game was shaking, thinking that was shaking the dice, but then me and Jack could not go away and just change what the value was. Oh, we need a 3, 1, 2, 3 on the A button, then press the B button, and it did it. And he loved that. It's like, obviously, it's probably not the best thing to be teaching your child, but it introduced the concept of variables. I think that really, just having an angle on it where he's got a bit of interest, because it's cheating, so it adds a bit of appeal to him. Not that I'm selling cheating to kids, but it was kind of a nice angle to introduce variables. And my way of explaining variables to him was, imagine you've got a name on a pocket, so the variable name on a pocket, and you're taking a bit of information and putting it in that pocket. So that's how I described it to him, and he seemed to get that quite well. And looking at this microbit, it looks like it's very extendable, but I've not really played with it beyond the very basics. But it sounds like you've got a lot more experience in this kind of thing. So before we dig into how we can extend it, could you just talk about your experience with the microbit? What's the basics you can do before we can start adding more hardware and buying more stuff, which I'm guessing it's going to get quite expensive quite soon, I'd imagine.
Yeah, this hobby of mine can get quite, it's funny. I'm pretty sure I could have a garage sale and make quite a lot of money. But yeah, I've been playing with the microbit for a long time, and there are experts on the microbit out there. This is a tool that I've spent some time playing with, but it's this whole ecosystem around the microbit and the Raspberry Pi as well is quite close to my heart, because it really gives, and I say people, but kids obviously are the part of the target audience there, but people too, because giving people the accessibility into this ecosystem, that there's so many gatekeepers out there, people that try and gatekeep on being a developer full stop, or anything in the STEM areas at all, in the it's starting at that developers trying to get the first job that have to have a degree to be able to get that, which I find preposterous these days, all the way down to the fact that we don't have enough female developers, and that starts at school generally. In fact, in primary school level, there seems to be a 50-50 split with interest in STEM subjects and computing, specifically for this conversation. But after primary school and the start of secondary school, then things like peer pressure tend to come in, and girls become dissuaded away from subjects. And it's not always peer pressure, obviously. It can be also the fact that they just get the perception around STEM subjects as being difficult or boring. And historically, I suppose they were. And that's an image problem, apart from anything, where it's middle-aged white guys who are mainly in those areas. But and that's definitely something that is changing, and that's fantastic, and something that I'm keen to change. Having two young girls here at home with me, and a wife, and even the cat's a girl, so I'm living in a house full of women, which is fantastic. And I see all of that angles. I was brought up primarily by my mum, and my sister was living in the house, so I've been around sort of women in those spaces quite a lot, and so it's important to me to make sure that there's accessibility for this sort of area. And the microbit and the Raspberry Pi and Scratch and block-based programming languages like that really do open the space up. And yeah, you mentioned MakeCode for the microbit there, and all you need to do is go to a free website, start dragging blocks around, and download it onto your microbit by copying a file, quite literally that, and then it just works. There's no software to set up. There's no it's just a USB lead into your computer and it's on and working. But removing all of that blockers of quite difficult. I mean, if you wanted to do Arduino, for instance, now you've got to learn C perhaps, and that's difficult. So the microbit it simplifies all of that and just gets you to hello world a lot faster. And your idea about making the dice and teaching variables that way is definitely something you can do. And one of the good things about things like Make Code is that there are lessons out there, lesson plans you can follow, and there's all sorts of content out there to help teach the microbit. And it is, you're right, fully flexible piece of kit as well. It's got a magnetometer built into it, and a couple of buttons and some LEDs, and they're touch sensitive, and there's a V2 microbit now. Is that the one that you bought?
No, I got the V1. I didn't actually know there was a V2. I basically went on Amazon and searched for microbit and ordered it until someone replied on Twitter saying, "How did you manage to get the V2 shipped out so quickly?" And I was like, "What's a V2? Quickly go on Google, have a quick look. Oh, drat!" so I did end up with a V1. So I don't know how. What's the V2 got? It's got the better Bluetooth and a speaker, hasn't it?
That's right. I think it's a speaker and there's an extra touch input now as well. So I mean, just those two things all on their own, because you could essentially you could plug in a speaker onto the Raspberry Pi if you wanted to. So you could get some little crocodile clips, and hook them up to the microbit's really cool. It's got this big fat connector at the bottom of it with sort of 3 input outputs and some power on there that you can hook crocodile clips up to, and then wire things up like speakers or servos to make robots and things like that. But yeah, so one of the applications is you can make it play music. But having the speaker on board for that now just makes that so much easier. And actually that was one of the things that tends to drive children. Once you have something physical and you're making something physical, then it really does it grabs their interest and keeps them going with the learning journey there. So no, it's good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's only just been released. I think I had a look the other day and I don't think I could find one for sale anywhere, so I think it must just be just coming out. But I have seen people reviewing them, the lucky few that have been given early access to these things.
So if you can't order them, I feel less bad that I got the V1 then, because I would have probably ordered it. I think it was 25 quid, so it wasn't breaking the bank or anything, but Jack seems to love it, so...
You'll have bought a kit for that then. That's a £25 would be a kit price, and the microbit itself you can get for about 10 or 12 quid, so dead cheap all on its own. But I guess, did yours come with some components and leads and things like that, or...?
It came with a USB, but it was kind of like the board, a USB that plugged in. What else was there? I think that was it, actually. Have I been...
Yeah, you've been hoodwinked. I'll send you a
Oh,
link
no.
to... Not really, I don't know. That's usually a kit price. There used to be a really good kit that came with some LEDs and a battery pack and some crocodile clips, and then there was some instructions for you to run through tutorials, and that was a similar price to what you're talking about there. So, yeah, no, you can buy... usually at least a microbit for about £12, so one of the most affordable and flexible little pieces of kit out there.
So you've just made the giveaway we did earlier a bit cheaper for me. Thank you.
Assuming you can find one. They might even get a V2.
Yes, that's true, if it's out. Well, depending on the price, I'll do a V2 if I can order that one. When looking at the Make code, one thing I really like about it is that there's another tab where you can go to JavaScript or Python, and you can actually see, whilst it's block oriented, so you're, I suppose we haven't really spoken about what block programming means, but as an example, like an if block, you can drag an if block onto a canvas, and that looks almost like a C shape, and then you can drag other blocks into that C, and any actions that occur within that C will happen if the if is true, if that makes sense. I'm perhaps not explaining that very well. I don't know whether you have a better way of explaining it on audio without actually showing.
Yeah, it's like programming with Lego is the best way to explain it. And you just grab these blocks and they all just fit together. And it's even easier than Lego in that, exactly like you've just said there, Dan, is where you can drag a block, and if you drag it over another block, it'll highlight where you can drop it. And so exactly what you just said, if you've got an if block, you just drag that from the tool palette on the left-hand side, and then you can just drag another block and drop it on top and it'll just click inside it. It is very, I find it very much like Lego, where the blocks all click together and they kind of feel magnetized because you click, drop them anywhere near another one, it'll sort of click into place. It's very satisfying actually the first time if you've never done it. And block-based programming, although a lot of developers turn their nose up at it, is very powerful now. And you look at things like Logic apps in the Microsoft Azure space, and in Power Apps and Power, all of that, the Power Platform stuff. A lot of that is drag and drop blocks, and it is powerful as well. Logic apps are really powerful. There's some really cool stuff you can do with Logic apps, and they're just drag and drop. So yeah, no, it might sound like it's aimed at children. It most certainly isn't.
Well, I guess with that kind of thing, people could argue it's not real programming, but it is. And when you're typing code, you're still working on top of abstractions. You're not working at a machine level. You've always, when programming, you've always got a compiler converting almost English to machine code. You're calling into libraries which do things. So if you download a NuGet package and you're calling some code which calls out to Azure, for example, you've not written that code. So even though you're writing code, you're still effectively writing blocks. So you could argue that nothing we do now is real code.
You're absolutely right. I mean, .NET Framework is just a collection. I mean, that's the whole point. The clue's in the word there. It's a framework. They've already written that code. And so you're dragging a piece of code in and it's abstracted away from you. You don't even see it for the most part. You just call into it. So yeah, although you're typing it, you are still block-based programming. You just don't realise it. You copy and paste code from Stack Overflow, and that's the same thing, isn't it? It's just you can see what's under the bonnet there. So yeah, no, I completely agree.
I like that. Stack Overflow is block-based programming. But as I say, I do like the fact that you can switch over to a JavaScript tab and see the JavaScript representation. But again, I guess when you do that, you're seeing library calls rather than lots and lots of code. So it's still quite small and easy to understand for the children and for adults as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and you mentioned Python as well. That's a relatively new addition to MakeCode as well, and about time essentially, because in this space, Python, a lot of schools and universities even are using Python as their teaching mechanism because it is so accessible. And yeah, those tabs in MakeCode are fantastic because you can start out by doing the blocks and dragging and dropping, and a pre-reading age child almost could do that because it's all nicely coloured. And if you've got an adult sitting next to you to tell them what to pick and drop it there, and you can just tell them what it is rather than reading it. But then, yeah, you want to move out of that and learn how the sausage is made, for instance, then you could just flick across to one of those other two languages and see what it is you're doing. Even if you don't actually program in that language, you can sort of then start to get an understanding of the paradigm that's actually happening. And you could do it the other way around as well. You could do a basic JavaScript application in MakeCode and then click the blocks tab and it'll convert it for you, as long as it's able to convert what you've written, that's pretty powerful all on its own.
I was actually just, as you were speaking, thinking about that, and then you kind of like read my mind. But if you were typing in JavaScript and you wrote like a really complicated JavaScript object, and then you went back to the block, I can picture that getting very confused quickly.
Yeah, one of the great things you can do with it though is you can make your own extensions for MakeCode, and I did that for an I/O expander, an input-output expander. So I mean, we mentioned earlier about this wonderful few inputs and outputs that are sitting on the bottom of the microbit. If you pick that microbit up and look in a little bit more detail, you'll see there's lots of little pins in between those bigger ones, and that breaks out interfaces like serial interfaces. And as soon as you've got access to things like SPI, serial peripheral interface, then you can drive chips. And so you can get a serial chip that you can talk to that has just inputs and outputs on it. And so my pinned tweet on my profile is a faux Enigma machine that I made. And of course, you need every letter in the alphabet as an input to make that work, which the microbit all on its own is not going to be able to do. But I wrote an extension to drive that chip. So all I needed to do was, and you can do inputs and outputs, but I was just reading, and you get a function call as a block in make code at that point. So you had to write the code in JavaScript. You can't make so much. You can do it, but the extensions tend to be written in JavaScript. So you can write that, abstract that all away, and you import it straight from GitHub, if you like, into make code, and then it becomes a block, and you can drag that block in, and as long as you've written your extension correctly, it can have variables and inputs and outputs and all of that sort of stuff built onto that block, just like a regular make code block. And then you just use it, just as we were just saying. That just becomes another piece of Lego, and I'm just reading, what's the value, and if there's a change in a value, then I put it up onto the microbit. So it was quite a fun project to learn how to take that system further.
That sounds amazing. I didn't know you could do that. Is it on GitHub?
Yeah, I think it is, actually. I need to look.
One other thing I saw, speaking of MakeCode, something called MakeCode Arcade.
Yeah.
I went onto it briefly, and I think on the left-hand side it showed almost like a Game Boy kind of icon, but I wasn't sure how you actually copied that to a physical device, or how you actually use that apart from on the machine.
Yeah, no, I've not spent a massive amount of time actually playing with that, but I have had a look at it. And there are people out there like Stu Lowe. If you follow Stu Lowe on Twitter, he's an educator. I think he's in America, perhaps. And he does quite a lot with it. But I think there's an Adafruit board that you can use. And you can download the code, just like you're doing with the microbit, and you can download that onto this Adafruit board, and it's got a little display on it and buttons. But there are other abstractions as well, where I think you can hook it up to LCDs, just to a normal HDMI connection or whatever, and you can build arcade cabinets, and there's all sorts of arcade cabinets popping up. And again, that Stu Lowe guy, he's done quite a few of those, and he uses them in his classes, which is great. And obviously, kids love games. Well, who doesn't love games anyway? But if you can gamify something, then the interest peaks even more. So
I've just realised this is probably going to get expensive, and my eldest actually listens to this podcast. For some reason, he's really obsessed with it, even though I'm sure he can't understand half of what we talk about. I think he likes the fact that Daddy's doing it, and he has it on his tablet. He asks Alexa to play them. So he's going to hear all these things and expect me to buy lots and lots of things. So
you must do it as well. You definitely must. It's so much fun. You will have so much fun. It's like buying Lego for your kids, and you end up spending more time doing it yourself than the kids do.
Jack, if you're listening, you need to save up your pocket money. Oh dear.
Let's start doing some chores and earn some more.
Oh, that's a good idea. He's not going to like that then. Oh, brilliant. When I did send that tweet out asking about different things, I think there was a whole list of different tools and things. So obviously I played with the microbit and MakeCode now, and there was something else, Tinkercad, which I think it was you that mentioned this one.
Yep, I think I mentioned everything. I get quite carried away with this entire subject. It's fantastic. It's so much fun. Tinkercad is amazing, and I do a talk on getting into IoT with nothing but your laptop, and that's what's so cool about all of this. I mean, to go back to MakeCode, you don't need a microbit to play with the microbit with MakeCode, because in the tool itself is a simulated microbit on the left-hand side, and it works. There's buttons on there, and you can tilt it and change the temperature, and all the sensors that are built into it you can play with. You can even do radio. I mean, the microbit's got radio and Bluetooth built into it. So if you've got two microbits, then you can do all sorts of cool experiments with like Morse code and stuff like that between two microbits. But you can do that online without the microbits first, which is great. I mean, if you're a classroom, for instance, and you've got 30 kids in there, it can get quite expensive quite quickly if you're buying a microbit for every student. Whereas if you can just get them programming online in the simulator, you could have 4 or 5 in a class, and then it becomes a lot more affordable. And that's the same with Tinkercad. Tinkercad takes that to a whole new level, though. When you go to Tinkercad, there's 3 or 4 different areas that you can go to, and there's a free 3D modeling application in there, and then below that you'll find Tinkercad circuits. And that is a fantastic free circuit playground, and you can drag batteries and resistors and LEDs and servos and motors and all sorts of chips, and it simulates all of it. And they've recently added a microbit to that catalogue of stuff that you can drag on there. So I've tweeted out recently, you can just drag a microbit on there, and then you can drag a little servo, and if you don't know what a servo is, it's a bit like a motor, but if you imagine a robot arm with limited mobility, then that would be servos, for instance, would be one way to make that. You can drag one of those on, and then you can drag wires onto the connections, onto the microbit, and then there's at the top right hand corner there's a button called code, and you click that, and then it pops out a very similar looking block-based interface for the microbit, and you can drag your blocks on there to make the program work. And then, the tweak that I've done, I've sped it up, but it literally took me about 2.5 minutes to make a circuit with a microbit and program it and run it. It's very fast and really accessible. But what's great is that, I came across it because it's also got an Arduino in there, a simulated Arduino. And if you pull it, it's a simulated Arduino Uno as it happens, and you can drag the Arduino Uno on there and wire it up, wire the circuit that you want up on there, and then you pop that code button out, and instead of C, you get blocks. And it's fantastic. So, if anybody's ever done any Arduino programming, you'll be aware that it's C that you're going to be programming it in, or MicroPython. So MicroPython is more accessible than C. Hebrew is more accessible than C, I think. C is hard. I've been doing C for most of my professional career, but not all day, every day. So I'm no expert with C. But that is, if you're going to do anything serious with Arduino, then you will probably be in C. But if you're just starting out, or if you're a child, C isn't the place you want to start. It definitely isn't. It's hard. So to be able to program an Arduino in with blocks is a great way of starting. And very much like MakeCode at that point, you can switch to the C to see what it actually does and gives you. And again, you can download that code and copy it onto your device. In the case of the Arduino, then you'll need Arduino Studio, but I think with the microbit, it just gives you that same hex file and you just copy it across. And it lets you test all sorts of stuff. I made a silly little robot car with 4 motors and a motor driver, and you can simulate all of that in Tinkercode. In Tinkercad, you don't need to build it. So I simulated it all in Tinkercad first, and then I just built it afterwards, and it just works. It wasn't very fast, I've got to be honest, but it went forwards and backwards, so that was the main thing.
When you first mentioned Tinkercad, we jumped on it very briefly with Jack. We only had about 10 minutes because I think it was just before dinner, and the first thing we saw was this 3D modelling interface that you mentioned. Yeah. So then Jack was immediately drawing things, and it could draw, and it turned 2D into 3D, but we didn't get to the hardware bit where we're dragging on Arduinos or all the other devices. So I didn't actually know you did as much as you just described.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And again, it's all free. It's made by Autodesk. To go back, MakeCode is a Microsoft product, and so is MakeCode Arcade. So that they partnered with Microbit to be able to get that product out there. And then Autodesk make Tinkercad, and obviously they make AutoCAD and expensive applications like that. So when people realise that this sort of functionality is free, and not many people have heard of Tinkercad either, which amazes me. When I give that talk, this is one of my favourite demos is to demo this because it's so powerful. But I always ask if anybody's heard of that at that point, and you'd be lucky if you get maybe 1 or 2 in a room of people doing IoT even. So it's quite surprising. So I'm like an unofficial advocate for their software. It's fantastic.
Does sound good. We'll have to get you on .NET Oxford speaking about it.
More than happy.
Well, I was going to say, if you said no, then we could cut that bit out. So
we could, yeah. And you just keep asking me until I said yeah.
Well, no, I'm not going to say that because it was January this year, wasn't it? And you came down and joined us at .NET Oxford when it was a physical event.
Yes.
Speaking about IoT and .NET Core. And I think in the conversation on Twitter that got you down, that was actually you asking me to come up to your user group to talk.
Yeah, it was, yeah. I loved it. It was fantastic. That user group is great, and Oxford is an awesome place to go and visit as well. So it didn't take much persuasion to get me down to Oxford anyway. And I love going and speaking at these meetup groups about stuff that I enjoy. But you're right, yeah, originally it was me approaching you to say, please come up. And you were like, hey, I can't really do it. I haven't got the time at the moment. But if you want to come down to me. Cheeky, I like.
See what that. I did there?
Well, it worked.
No, it's a fantastic talk, and I still do owe you that talk. That's the .NET Kubernetes. I'm running it all on a Raspberry Pi stack, so I've done that a couple of times, but I should really come up to yours. Although now things are virtual anyway, so I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah, well, you can still show it. It's fine, and definitely in the new year we've only got one more meetup left this year, which we've got Mohit Boita. If you're interested in really pretty looking IoT creations, he uses bronze or brass rods rather to wire up LEDs and robots and stuff like that. So if you look for Mohit Boita on Twitter, you'll see just some fantastic stuff. I think he might be a particle evangelist, particle maker, an Arduino-like board for their ecosystem that's also fantastic. And we've also got Catherine Makin, and she's amazing, an amazing artist. She does space artistry. She draws and paints all sorts of amazing paintings, and she does it online as well. And I think that she created the most successful artist-based Kickstarter as well. So we've got her and Mohit on the 17th of December, Thursday the 17th. So I don't know when this podcast is going out. So it'll either, I hope you enjoyed it, or please do go and watch it.
Well, it's probably take me like around a week to edit, like around the kids and work, and yeah. I've got a talk on Tuesday at another user group, .NET Southwest, which I've barely started, so I need to really get that sorted. So it's probably going to be about a week from now. But we can include links to all of these things in the show notes as well. Which I think this is going to be a long list of links in the show notes. I've got a feeling.
Yeah, it will. Yeah, there'll be like a library of links for people to go through. It's good. It'll be there in perpetuity. So we can literally, if we have this conversation again, you can just point people at the show notes and they're off and running.
Yeah, that sounds good. With me being a bit biased towards .NET, I was going to say .NET Core, but I can't say .NET Core anymore, can I? It's .NET 5. So.
Hey, well, you can. .NET Core is still LTS. It's still in long-term support, so you can absolutely still... Well,
yeah, and .NET 5 isn't, so...
There you go. Yeah, I think that's the next version of .NET 5, is it, that's LTS? I think, is it? I don't know. I forget now. Need to check that.
3.1's LTS and 5 isn't, 6 will be. So basically every even number is LTS, and it's going to release they're going to release a major version every November, I think they said, and then every other one, so every even number will be LTS. So yeah, 5 isn't, but as you rightly say, 3.1 is.
Absolutely.
.NET runs everywhere now. So I guess we're talking about these Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and stuff. We can just run .NET on all of these things. Does that work with things like Tinkercad and all this kind of stuff? Or are these primarily Python and JavaScript?
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, sadly, there is no... actually, just think about it. There's no simulators out there that use .NET at all. And it's something that I wanted to start looking at, actually, so that people could see how easy it was to do .NET IoT stuff. I mean, there's a Raspberry Pi simulator for if you want to get into cloud technology. There's an Azure Raspberry Pi simulator out there. That's using Node, which is JavaScript, essentially. And so you go to the website, and again, there'll be a link in the show notes, no doubt. And there's some pre-populated Node code there on the right, and on the left-hand side is a Raspberry Pi with a temperature and humidity sensor and an LED that flashes when you run the code. You just follow the help files and you create all the resources in the cloud in Azure, and then you copy and paste a single key into this simulator and press run, and you can see the messages going up to Azure. And if you download another free tool called the Azure IoT Explorer, then you can sort of hook up to the IoT hub, as it's called, that you're talking to there, and you can see those messages, which is a really cool demo to show people, because it doesn't take very long to provision all of those little bits, and they're actually quite straightforward, more Lego blocks almost, to get sort of a simulated Raspberry Pi sitting there in a website, and then on your computer you can have an application running and you can see those messages that are being sent. And it's actually, when perhaps your focus isn't on the tech, it's more about provisioning the cloud services, then that gives you that abstraction to not have to worry about having to set up a Raspberry Pi with Raspbian and SD cards and installing all the prerequisites and stuff. So that's fantastic. But I mean, to go back to your original point about .NET, you can absolutely do .NET Core or .NET 5 on a Raspberry Pi, and I've made a couple of scripts that make that easier for people. There's no sudo apt-get for 32-bit Linux flavors, Debian flavors, sadly. So there's actually quite a few steps that you've got to go through to get that to work. It's not incredibly difficult, but again, if sort of managing Linux isn't your thing, then it might be a little bit of a barrier. But I've just got one single command that you can run, and it'll just put .NET Core or .NET 5 on your Raspberry Pi, and you do a .NET -- info, and you're up and running. So no, absolutely.
And then I guess if you're used to using something like Docker, you can just spin that up on the Raspberry Pi and have .NET whatever, or whatever technology it is. But that's probably a bit too complex if we're teaching kids to code, but just getting something running.
Yeah, for teaching kids, absolutely. You probably wouldn't want to do that, but yeah, just put .NET on there, and you can now even install VS Code on a Raspberry Pi. So there's a 32-bit ARM variety of VS Code that you can install on there, and once you've got that, then you can sit there and you can run programs from VS Code, even as long as you've got .NET 5 installed. But you mentioned Docker. Microsoft have got a technology called IoT Edge, which is based on the Moby engine, which is basically Docker as well. And there's some setup instructions to get that working, and that allows you to be able to bring down traditionally cloud-based technologies like machine learning and SQL Server and stuff like that down onto something like a Raspberry Pi and do it locally rather than having to pay for the services up there. So there's some cool stuff once you do start looking at Docker. And you can run traditional Docker as well, obviously, and hook that up to Docker Hub and things like that. Although with the things that's happening with Docker Hub lately, I'm not sure should be saying that. But
What's happened?
Yeah, there's the rate limiting, how many Docker images you can pull down, essentially. So I think Amazon have stuck their hand up and have gone, don't worry, we'll support you. But yeah, the rate limiting, even free projects, I think, are going to be rate limited. And I mean, I'm no expert on this either, but I did see all that news and had a quick look at it, and it sounds like a sensible business decision, because there's going to be a lot of cost. If you don't know, then Docker Hub allows you to be able to host these things called Docker images. Now, a Docker image is a virtual machine, it's called. So it's a small piece of code that pretends to be a whole machine, and you pull it down, this Docker image, onto your let's say Raspberry Pi in this case, and you run it. Docker runs it as a machine, and it contains your code, and it contains the requirements your code needs to run. So Dan mentioned .NET 5 there, for instance, but you'd get a small operating system as well. So Raspbian is a flavour of something called Debian, a Linux operating system, and you would get a version of that and your code running all together. So we were joking about recording this podcast about the fact that it was, it's working fine on Dan's machine. And this is one of the things that they're trying to solve with that problem, is allowing people to be able to package their dev machine almost, and it just works everywhere because everybody gets their dev machine. It's not that, but that's the idea, at least, is that you get a consistent little area of code for your application to run in. There are things you've got to take into consideration when you're doing Docker on a Raspberry Pi, because of course it's great to be able to run a console application, but as soon as you need access to the GPIO, the general purpose input-output on the Raspberry Pi, then you need to make sure that, say, the Docker images is running as a privileged Docker image, so that it's got access to the underlying operating system and then the hardware underneath that. But once you understand these abstractions, then it's quite easy to get going, and I've got another talk that does that too. I'll talk for everything, it's all right, but not one on Kubernetes. So
Well, as I say, I can include all of your talks in the show notes, in the pages and pages of show notes, and I'll include a link to my Kubernetes talk as well, because that does go into what Docker is, what Kubernetes is, how to install it all on a Raspberry Pi cluster, and it just explains all the concepts as well, so I'll include a link to that as well. You pointed out VS Code, running that on the Raspberry Pi. Presumably you can also do VS Code remote. There's the remote extensions now, so you can just have that on your computer, but remote into the Raspberry Pi, and it'd be as if you're browsing a local file system in VS Code.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly like you've just said. There's a VS Code remote extension, and it dials in with a secure putty session almost. It's an SSH session that you open up onto your Raspberry Pi in this case, and you open the code that is on your Raspberry Pi directly in VS Code, and you are then unaware that code is actually on the Raspberry Pi, but you've got access to the command line at that point as well, and you can run the code and it just works, and you can put debug points in there and it stops at the debug points, and it's quite powerful. Funnily enough, when I first started looking at .NET Core, that extension didn't work for me. It's entirely likely it was my fault, but funnily enough, I was playing with it just before the talk at .NET Oxford, and I couldn't get it to work. And I had a talk all worked out, and I was able to. I had just a shared directory, Samba Share it's called, but just a shared directory on the Raspberry Pi, and I could copy the code on there and build it on the Pi and run it on the Pi, and it was all beautiful and worked. But I thought, it's not very production-y, this. It's not kind of how you'd want it. You don't really want to build the code on the Pi, because, well, the Pi's slow, and my Surface Pro 7 or whatever it was I had at that time was way faster. So you can develop all of the code on your PC and then just push it out to the Pi. So if you're unaware in .NET, then you can do something called publish, and you can specify the platform that you want to publish to, the type of platform. And ARM32 is one of those options. But I went down a different route at that point, so I used WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, to be able to do some building and connecting up to the Raspberry Pi. So you can run the same sort of idea that the remote extension is doing under the hub, but you could do a tunnel with Putty. Putty is an SSH client, but it comes with a console flavour as well, and you can tunnel into the Pi, and you can attach a process then in VS Code to the .NET debugger on the Pi. And you can also then sync, I think it's called rsync, the name of the tool you can use, and you can sync the files across to the Pi and tell it to run it. And so all of that is kind of like my bespoke version of what that plugin is doing. But now I've got everything set up to do that. I kind of don't use that plugin, and I think there are some limitations as well. I don't think it works as well for actually getting the files on there. But I've not looked at it in a while, so I could be wrong about that now. But I seem to remember that you still had to get the files on there, and then still had to build them to get it to run on there. There was something quirky that my way of doing it was obviously superior, obviously. It just took a lot more setting up than downloading an extension and running it.
I think it was probably so new at the time as well, because I think it's now it's, especially because WSL2 is more widely used, and the remoting stuff is just probably much more used and hopefully easier to use. We've actually got Stuart Leeks doing an episode fairly soon talking about WSL2, so he's recently published a book, WSL2 Tips and Tricks. Ooh. So he's going to join us and talk all about that. So we'll talk about, and I know in his book he covers things like, well, obviously WSL2, but the remote extension, Docker, and all this kind of stuff. We're recording that next week, so hopefully that should be out there in a couple of weeks.
I like it. Is that book out? That
yes, yeah. So
I've got a feeling I won that book at .NET Conf. At the end of .NET Conf, they run like a party, and they've run competitions during that time, and one of them was to shout out the name of Jeff Fritz's next animal costume that he has to wear. It's like an ongoing joke on his stream. He was the host, Jeff Fritz, and I was one of the first 20 people that shouted out, and I got an email, and I'm pretty sure there was like 10 books. You won 10 books, and there was only one of them that's currently released, so I'm going to be getting little deliveries of books when they're released. I'm pretty sure that is the one I won, so that's cool.
I can highly recommend it. It's not, as I say, it's not just WSL2. It covers like so many different like tips and tricks on. It talks about Windows Terminal, VS Code, as well as WSL2, and a whole bunch of stuff. I don't want to give too much away because obviously we're talking about it, but also he wants to sell his book, so
well, quite rightly.
Yeah, I need to be careful when we record the show not to give too much away, but
yeah, exactly.
I'm looking forward to that. You mentioned earlier about like using things like Azure, so even though we've got like these devices and stuff, we can still reach out and utilize the cloud. I think I was listening to a .NET Core podcast episode, which you appeared in. It wasn't talking about teaching kids to code, but it kind of like touched on these kind of topics. And the thing that I remember stood out was that you mentioned about a space station that kids can submit experiments to, which sounded really cool.
Yeah, that takes cloud to a whole different level. So the Raspberry Pi, that's obviously been around for a good long time now. The Raspberry Pi Foundation have done some fantastic work. Eben Upton and his entire team down there. I mean, Eben Upton's drive is very similar to what we've been talking about here. So he's a similar age to me, similar background, sort of growing up at school. And so if you're of a certain age and you grew up in the UK and you went to school, then you probably had a BBC micro computer in your classroom. And that was probably your first exposure to any form of computing, unless you were lucky enough to have a computer at home. A ZX Spectrum or something is fine. But yeah, the BBC micro, I think, would have been the first thing that a lot of us of a certain age experienced, and been doing 10, print hello world, 20 go to 10, all of that sort of stuff is how we grew up. But that was accessible. You turned it on and you were immediately programming. And in fact, there was less games back then. And they were more expensive and harder to get, essentially. And so if you wanted to play on the computer, you had to make your own game. And a lot of people had to do that. So, I mean, that coining a phrase of hello world that we all do now, that started back then. This was how a lot of people experienced computers, was writing their first program, just doing exactly that. But as times have moved on, computers aren't as popular now. They just aren't. Tablets are one of the most popular platforms that people use to consume anything. And it's removing that facility for children to experience that wonder of making their first computer program. Because you just don't have that. When you buy a tab or something like that from Amazon, you turn it on and you play a game, or you watch Netflix or something like that. You don't get immediately shown a prompt. And now, I mean, the Raspberry Pi doesn't immediately do that, but the Raspberry Pi is a really stripped down Linux computer, and cheap as well. You're talking 25 quid for a full Linux computer. Obviously, you need some other bits to go with it, but a credit card size computer of that size. But it breaks out these pins to let you control LEDs and read buttons and make robots and think whatever you like. But obviously, at some point, somebody had to say, well, I like all of this, but you know what's cooler? Space. And kids, and I mean, not just kids, I love space. Space is fantastic. But you say that, you're going to do something in space to a kid and they will jump at that chance. So there's an AstroPi project, it's called. Now, when Tim Peake went up to the space station, on the ship that took all of his resources and his food and everything up there was 2 Raspberry Pis, and they were in this metallized hardened enclosure, but essentially just the same Raspberry Pi, and they had what's called a hat sitting on it. Now I've got the hat. You won't be able to see it because this is a podcast, but Dan, who is recording this, he can see it. So there's something called a Sense hat, and it's very much like a microbit. I mean, you see your microbit, then you can see this array of LEDs that's on it. Then it's got one of those on there, and it's also got a button on there. It's actually a joystick, but it can work as a button. And it's got a magnetometer on there, and a gyroscope, and temperature and humidity sensor, and I'm sure I'm missing out a whole heap of other stuff that it can do as well. But what it lets you do is the fact that they've sent 2 Raspberry Pis with these on there means that you can run experiments in space. So you could have a little experiment that just looks at the time of day and how the temperature on the space station changes when it's exposed to the sun, or it's in the shadow of the Earth, or whatever. Or even just send messages to the astronauts. So every year there's a project that they run as part of this that allows students to submit their experiments to this AstroPi program, and then a lucky 5, I think it is, will get to run their full experiments, and the results get sent back to the class for them to be able to see the results of their experiments that were running on the actual space station. And it's fantastic. They've expanded it recently as well, where younger children, so I've got a 4-year-old, even a 4-year-old is able to sit and with a parent or carer or whoever, or a member of the teaching facility or whatever, can sit and help them make a program that say, the weather today is going to be nice or something, and have a wonderful time. On that little display, it can scroll across. and that runs on the space station, and they take a photo of it running, and you get that back, and it's just a fantastic experience for children to be able to do something like that. And what's more, of course, you can look up and see the actual space station as a bright light moving across the sky, and you can say your code was running on that, and they get a little certificate, and it's so good. It's such a really, really rewarding experience.
I think we're definitely going to have to include the word space in the podcast title. A bit of clickbait going on, and
and free microbit. That's it.
Oh yes. Now, if after we finish recording, if there's a tweet goes out from Pete Gallagher with the name of the technology, it doesn't count.
No.
It looks like you've got enough devices anyway. You don't need another one.
Yeah, I mean, I have. Where we're recording this, Dan gets to see my my office essentially. I've got the webcam on, but what Dan can't see is everything to the left of me over here is all sort of there for a good reason. I've got the webcam pointing this way because it's just I've got all sorts of change machine electronics just sitting directly to my right, and then I've got a 3D printer over there, and then sort of the far side of my office is where I do most of my IoT tinkering and soldering and all of that sort of stuff. And so I've got Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and retro computers even over there. That's another one of my passions. And an Xbox, obviously, who hasn't, and a telly and all that sort of stuff, and a Raspberry Pi Media Center and all of the little robot arms and stuff that I was tinkering with and teaching myself stuff. And my office is awesome.
We spoke about tangents. You just said 3D printer, and it feels like we shouldn't go on that tangent, but I can't help it. I would love to get one and just think of all the things you can actually create with that. What kind of stuff have you built with your printer?
I've not had it that long, actually, and for exactly the same reason as you've just said there, I just kind of wanted one. I mean, I kind of feels as though if I want to call myself a maker of any sort, then having a 3D printer is like a prerequisite. I don't think you can even do that. You call yourself a maker if you've not got a 3D printer. But they're accessible now. They used to be, hundreds, if not thousands of pounds for a half decent one. But I've got an Ender 3 Pro. And I bought it from one of the Chinese selling sites. I forget what it, Banggood or something like that it's called. I forget now. But it was like 140 quid delivered. And so they are affordable. And filament as it takes to actually print those things, that's cheap now too. You have to assemble your Ender 3 Pro when it arrives, and that's the most difficult part of the entire process, that and levelling the bed. So it prints onto this little bed as it is, it moves around, and if you don't get that level, then you end up with just garbage instead of something printed. So I've not had much time to print lots of things, but I printed out some troll characters for my daughters, and of course, Love Me Forever for that. You were talking about being able to convert something in Tinkercad, in the CAD part of that. And so during build, I took Bit. Now, Bit is Microsoft's, see if I can get that to appear. It's a little bit bright. There we go. Bit is Microsoft's mascot. They're really approachable mascot. It's fantastic. So I took a 2D version of Bit and extrapolated out to 3D and put MVP on the front because I'm an MVP and I was, geeking. And printed that out. But I mean, obviously, one of the things that everybody... Oh, we're going to have a disastrous avalanche in a second. Oh, no. Right, hold on. There we are. Oh, jeez. Is this... You obviously print one of these out. So this is the boat benchmark. It's really hard to see. But every 3D printer will have one of these printed to begin with. So it's just basically a little chuggy boat that you'd see in a cartoon or something, but what it does, it tests sort of how well your printer's set up and how well it's able to do the various different bits of 3D printing. And of course, I printed a Star Trek com badge, as you do.
Knowing you, that doesn't surprise me then.
Yeah, this is true. I'm a big Star Trek geek. One of the things that people tend to print first, actually, is parts for the 3D printer, which is crazy. People always laugh about, I'll buy a 3D printer, 3D print all the parts and then send it back. But they're never perfect. But the good thing with the Ender is that it's an open source community, so you could print and reprint different parts for it. So I had to do that because the filament that I'd bought, the spindle hole was too small for the spindle that came with the Ender 3. So I had to kind of mackle something up with the example filament that they give you in the box to be able to print a holder, to be able to put the filament on, to be able to print some stuff. Which is crazy. But no, it's really cool. It's noisy. It's off now. But I mean, obviously, one of the great things in this maker community during the pandemic, and we've used that word once, and I'll give us once, it's fine, is that people were able to get involved printing and helping to print parts for PPE, which is that's a fantastic thing. So giving people the opportunity to contribute like that in whatever way they could. And I know that Nottingham, for instance, there was a whole part of the community dedicated to printing the holders. You can't print the PPE itself, but you could print for masks. You could print the holders for the masks that are reusable. I think they throw the transparent part away and then keep using the holder part. So people were churning out hundreds, if not thousands. I know Andrew from Tech Nottingham produced quite a lot of those. There's quite a few people that were doing that. So yeah, it's a really good cause.
Yeah, definitely. I've realised we've gone on for over an hour. So, but I'm going to take one final tangent before we finish, because in our Twitter conversation beforehand, you started talking about Twitch and streaming, and we're talking about OBS and stuff. And I just think, I know this is like a complete tangent now, but I've not done any streaming or anything. I've never, as I mentioned to you before, we've used Zoom a lot for .NET Oxford. And obviously we're recording this podcast, but that's not streaming, that's not live. I've done a few talks and things, but I've never used Twitch either as a host or even a participant. But it's something you do quite a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, I've not done a massive amount of it, to be perfectly honest, but I have done. So to start sort of at the start, I mentioned Jeff Fritz earlier, and there's Layla Porter as well. So those two people, sort of, I was catching their streams, and they're fantastically well done, and they're both amazing people. And so I looked at those, how do you do that? How do you make it look that good and produce it that well? And I mean, obviously it takes also having a really good personality and being able to carry the stream. And I mean, that's quite the important part. But so
I definitely couldn't do that then.
No, you absolutely could. It would be perfectly fine. And I would watch something like this on Twitch quite happily. And it just adds another dimension because obviously we could then be showing what it is we're talking about at the same time. So you could absolutely do it. We'll talk offline. I'll get you doing it. But one of the things that you learn quite quickly is that even if you have got a beast of a machine, doing any form of streaming is difficult. It seems to work all right for a bit, but then you have people in the stream saying, "Oh, you're breaking up," and you suddenly your webcam's at 2 frames a second, and you realise that it's better to not try and do streaming and the sort of maybe you're live streaming, you're programming, you're showing some demos and stuff like that. If you try and do that and sending out your webcam and the audio and the whole of your screen at the same time, it just slows everything down. And I know Clifford Agius will be a testament to this as well, because he's got the same Surface Book that I've got, and he can't get it to work properly. So what you learn is that you need a second PC, and you have a second PC sitting there that just does the streaming of the camera and your mic. And you can use something called NDI, which is a network technology to be able to transfer what's on your screen here, your development machine, to another machine in near real time. It's really good. So you have OBS actually running on both machines, and you program on this one, and it's just sending your screen across to the other machine, and all that other machine's job is just to stream the content you're showing there, the microphone and the webcam. And the great thing is that if you crash your PC that's doing the actual hard work, not the streaming, the stream carries on and you can reboot it and you can carry on speaking. So there's some really good... Once you've got that set up, then it actually works really well. And the community around this is burgeoning now as well. I'm quite surprised you've not sort of at least checked some of them out. But the problem is time, I guess, for everybody. They've only got so many hours in the day. And
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my problem, because working full time, as I say, it's because it's not freelance, it's contracting. I've got to do 8 hours a day solid with pair programming all day long. I don't have that time. And then kids afterwards, I've obviously got to do stuff with .NET Oxford as well, and the podcast now. I just don't have time to, that I really struggle. So exactly. Even like I feel awful because running a user group, I feel I need to attend other people's user groups. But I just struggle with time.
That's true. I mean, I'm really lucky. I mean, I'm on a show called Azurish, and we send that out via Twitch. But I mean, kudos to Liam Gulliver, because he's spent so much time making that stream look awesome. And I mean, he's done a fantastic job. He knows way more than I know about this subject, but he's made it look really pretty. He's got all these assets, and he's got this two PC environment. He's got an office not too dissimilar to mine, and on the other side he's got this full nice machine that's doing all of the streaming, and he's got cut scenes and intro and outro videos, and he's got the facility to move us around in the stream in these little captioned areas and bring up prompts. And there's so much to learn if you want to make it look good, and Liam spent that time doing it. And as I mentioned, Layla Porter and Jeff Fritz have been doing it for a long time. They're part of a live streamer community. Luce Carter as well, I think, is part of that same community. There's some awesome people in there. So yeah, I mean, I'd highly recommend that you just go and watch any of those shows. Come and watch Azurish. I've got to say that, that would be the place to start fortnightly on I believe it's a Tuesday at 12:30, I think it is, or something like that.
It's a great name.
Yeah, it's good. Hopefully we're going to take that some places as well. We've got Derek Campbell, I think, from next year. He's going to be joining it, and we're going to try and grow it into a channel. So it'll be a little bit like the Visual Studio or the AWS or whatever Twitch channels, where they host sort of topic-based conversations, and it's not necessarily the same thing each week. So different times across the week will be different shows. So that's the plan that Liam and Jonathan primarily have been working on that.
That's very cool. I did try playing around with OBS to actually get it for .NET Oxford, just because you can move elements like your webcam around the screen and get that to appear in Zoom. But I found that I got it to work, but showing code, it was really blurry. So maybe I don't know whether I'm doing something wrong, but maybe I need to have another go at that. Or maybe it's just a more powerful machine or a second machine, or using the NDI stuff. So I think I used the virtual cam plugin, but there's probably better options than that. No,
you're doing it right. It's probably just the canvas size and the output that you didn't have set up right. Both of those, if you get those both set to 1080p or 720 at least, then it should work fine. I did that exact same thing. If you do, a few of the meetup groups use Google Meet instead. And one of the beautiful things about Zoom, and I'm an advocate of Zoom as well, that seems to be the best streaming platform out there. One of the great things is you can share a portion of your screen. Now, if you've got a 49-inch screen like I've got, sharing a portion of it is a necessity. So you could drag a rectangle around an area and do that. Now, Google Meet and Teams don't let you do that. So using OBS is the best way round, so that you can use OBS to just grab a portion of your screen, and then you're right, the virtual cam plugin that you're talking about makes OBS then appear as a camera to things like Google Meet and Zoom as well, although theoretically you wouldn't need to do it for Zoom, depending on what you want to do. There are other really good reasons to use it as well, in that obviously you can all have all sorts of effects going on and change chroma keys and stuff like that. But yeah, if you need a hand, obviously, then do let me know, and I'll just put you onto Liam.
No, yes, I'll definitely pick your brains on that, because I did try. I tried setting all the resolutions and things and had no luck. But yeah, I'll pick your brains offline on that. So before we wrap up, dev tips. Each episode I'm trying to do at the very end, basically similar that I've done for .NET Oxford in the past, where at the end I'll do one, and then the guests can do a dev tip about anything they want. So
perfect. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and as a lot of us Microsoft MVPs have joined a program called the MVP Docs and Learn Champion program, and the idea behind this is that obviously we sort of eulogize and evangelize about this Docs and Learn, Microsoft Docs and Learn content, but this was an easy ask, because if you've not seen it, then if you go to the docs.microsoft.com, I think it is, website, then there is a plethora of curated Microsoft content there to be able to get you started with any topic on the Microsoft stack and outwards from that even. There's posts in there about Linux and stuff like that as well. But what's great about it, it's free. So, I mean, that's just a boon to begin with. But it's obviously curated by the people that are making or using that technology, so that you know that the quality is going to be good. There are so many people out there blogging and stuff like that, and it's absolutely fantastic. But it's quite difficult then to get a guarantee of the quality of whatever that content is. So to be able to go and grab this sort of content is fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I'd definitely say that reading that sort of stuff is a great dev tip. Obviously, you know, if we're into promoting things as well, then I'm a Pluralsight author as well. And I've not released any courses yet, but releasing soon, I'll be releasing an IoT course, at least, an AZ220 exam, Microsoft exam, IoT developer exam, and I'm creating content that helps people work towards passing that exam. So hopefully in the next 3 or 4 weeks there should be the beginnings of that course started to be released. So that would be my secondary tip: self-promotion.
Very nice. I was actually going to mention Pluralsight when you were talking about curation. So like, just because, you know, like with Microsoft Learn and Pluralsight, you know that that's quality content, not someone that's knocked up a blog post that might not know what they're doing.
You're exactly right. And I mean, Microsoft and the Azure platform go hand in hand with Pluralsight. They have a partnership there. And there's curated Microsoft sort of sponsored content on the Pluralsight platform to help people with Azure stuff, and quite often a lot of that is free actually, and people don't realise that there's quite a lot of Pluralsight content out there for Azure that's free. My course won't be free as far as I'm aware. I hope not, because I'm going to get paid at some point. But yeah, no. Again, that platform would be the place to go if you're going to learn. I mean, it's not just Azure either. There's AWS and Google content on there as well, and then all sorts of soft skills stuff as well that people like Stephen Haunts are creating. So there's all sorts of really well curated, well documented, well made content on there. So
fantastic. So my dev tip is actually, it's not really a dev tip, but I discovered this morning. So I thought, this is amazing, so I'm going to share it anyway. I tweeted out a tweet this morning, and there was lots of different replies and lots of different threads. And I was chatting with someone on Slack, and we're like basically we're talking about the topic of the tweet, and I was saying, "Oh, here's the tweet that I did earlier," and I sent it to him. And then I realised that it was impossible to follow the conversation. So it'd be really good to have some kind of Twitter conversation visualizer. So I googled it, and I found a tool by someone called, on Twitter is PaulGB, called Treeverse, which I'll include a link on the show notes, but if you just search GitHub for Treeverse, and it's incredible. It's a Chrome plugin, and I think it works in I think there's other plugins as well. You point it at a Twitter conversation, and you get this graph of, basically a tree graph of the conversation, and you can just click through the tree graph and see the conversation in that thread on the side. It was just amazing. I was mind blown. So it's not really a dev tip, but I saw that this morning and thought that was going to be my dev tip anyway.
I like it. There's another one as well. There's a Twitter handle called ThreadReader App. Have you seen that?
No.
You just mention ThreadReader App, and you can say unroll after it, and it creates you a web page based on that entire conversation. So I'm not quite sure how well it does with lots of branches off a conversation, but say somebody's got one of 20 tweets and it's a big long, it's basically a blog post in Twitter, isn't it? You can mention ThreadReader Unroll at the end of it, and then it will create a publicly accessible web page for that. I don't think it lives in perpetuity, but the great thing about that is, of course, that Twitter's not the only social media platform, but so there might be people on LinkedIn or Facebook that don't use Twitter for whatever reason, but if there's a really interesting set of threads of tweets there, then you can just mention them and then point them at that same thing. So it sounds similar, but a different way round to what you're talking about. I like the idea of a tree view of a conversation like that.
With this one, there's a button that says expand all, so it expands the tree. There's another button that says share link. So I think in the same way as you've just described, you can share that web page with someone else that might not be on Twitter.
Yeah, perfect.
But yeah, that was really cool.
I like that.
We're probably out of time because we're looking at the clock. It's an hour and a quarter.
I don't think we started until about 1:15 with various things that happened anyway. So
cool. But an absolute massive thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure to chat. I'll definitely be picking your brains after this.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I mean, yeah, you're good to cut it short, because I could literally talk all day about this subject. It's fantastic. It's been good fun. Thank you.
No worries. Well, we've got this little outro from Jack as well, which I'm going to super glue on to the end as well. He's because he watches quite a bit of YouTube, and is obsessed with the concept of subscribing.
Yeah, my daughter's same thing.
He does pretend video, not video, like we just like talk out, and he would end with "subscribe now, click subscribe now."
My daughter does that exact same thing. She even puts on an American accent because it's mostly American people she was watching it. Oh,
that's it. It's like some of the things both of our boys come out with, just because they've listened to American YouTube videos.
yeah.
Oh dear.
She'll sit there and she'll watch videos of people watching videos. Oh, jeez.
Although saying that, it is quite, some of the videos he likes watching are not technology making things, but people just, like with getting cardboard boxes or bits of plastic and glue and just making lots of different things. And it's insane, some of the stuff they make.
There's one called Slick Slime Sam that's a bit like that my daughter watches, where they're making things. And she watches Brave Wilderness as well, which is like an adventurer, and he goes and gets bitten by various different insects and animals and stuff like that. But it's still educational as it goes. It's a sensationalist, but it's educational.
Oh, excellent. Right, well, I best actually get some real work done. I'm sure you're the same.
Yeah, I need to carry on with that Pluralsight course. No, yeah, anytime. It's been so much fun. I love it. And it's great talking to you again as well. So,
yeah, definitely. It's been a while. Well, I say like January when you came down, it feels like years away. So it feels like a lifetime ago.
No, you're right.
So...
It does feel like a completely different time. Yeah, jeez.
Hello, my name's Jack, Daddy's son, and I hope you enjoyed and listened very well. So please subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you on the next episode.